Hi everyone, and welcome to WCI Consulting's webinar, Tips, Tricks, and Best Practices for your universe. This will be a business object centered. Our consultant today that will be running the webinar will be Neil Dave. He'll take you through a number of different tricks. This is part one, so there will be part two as well. If you have any questions during our webinar, please feel free to use that question box on the right-hand side. We'll try our best to either answer during the webinar, or we'll come back for questions at the very end. If there's anything that's very detailed or system-specific, then we'll go ahead and we'll take that offline. Most of you have my email address, and I'll list our consultant Neil Dave's at the end as well. I always like to bring up this mission statement, let everyone know where WCI is coming from in terms of a client interaction. You know, we look at you guys as partners, not necessarily just sales. So move on to a little bit of a background for WCI Consulting. I can let you guys read through that just as well as I can read it. I wanted to note that our instantaccessbi.com is now online. What that basically is allows you to have access to a business intelligence consultant, pretty much all through your workday. It'll allow you to ask simple questions, share your screen, things that you may not know that well. We consider ourselves experts, so we will be able to help you with, hopefully. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Neil Dave, and he is going to run with it and give you some tips, tricks, and best practices.
Thanks, Trent. So today is part one of the series of tips, tricks, and best practices for Universe Designer. And before we get started, I just wanted to give a brief background of what Universe Designer does and some of the capabilities within it for some of those that that have not seen Designer. So what Universe Designer is, Universe is a business representation of organizational data that helps end users access data across using common business terms, and it isolates business users from technical details of databases where source data is stored. So what that's basically saying is the fact that users, if you have report consumers, they will be hidden from the fact that there's actual technical data or background data, the back-end data of what is being run against the database. Universes are made up of objects and classes that are mapped to source data in the database and accessed through the queries and reports. So when I go through the demo, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, of how we connect to a database, how the Universe connects to the database, and some of the restrictions or controls you can place on those in order for you to provide efficient queries. And the last thing about the Universe is that it's a semantic layer that maps complex data into descriptive business terms used across the organization, such as product, customer, region, revenue, margin, or cost. So a lot of times you may have report consumers or report builders that are building building queries. When they're building queries, it's very essential as you being the Universe builder that you provide descriptive terms. Then it makes it easier for the report builder to build the reports in an efficient manner as well. So some of the benefits of a Universe are, it's like I mentioned briefly, it's a separate business and IT responsibilities. Only metadata models need to know the SQL and understand the complex data structure. So for the Universe Designer, this is primarily designed for somebody that has the background knowledge of your database and is able to map together a specific Universe structure or a schema model for the building of these reports. One of the most important benefits that I like to talk about is data security. So data exposed to a specific group of users, meaning that I'm going to show you some different ways in here how you can expose data to a set number of users. There's something called RowLevel Security, also hiding objects, and providing security around specific objects. So with that in mind, as everyone can see my screen here, what I've done is I've logged into Universe Designer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a sample universe that's already been created and talk a little bit about it and and how that's being built. So I've logged into the system, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, Import, And what I'm doing is I'm importing the universe from my repository. And so from here, the repository is a shared location where all users can access a specific universe. So that's where the repository is going to be comes into play. So whenever a user is building a report, they're going to, based off the universe that's being built, they're going to use that information in building their reports. Okay, so in here I pulled in an eFashion universe, which is our sample data universe. And what you'll see in here is a set of tables right here, and then you'll see some joins in here that are being connected to these tables. So I guess one of the questions is, how are you able to incorporate these tables into here? Well, the simple thing, the way you do this is if you go to File and Parameters, what you can do is, this is what's allowing you to create or edit a connection. Now in here, what I wanted to do is show you a little bit about the connections in here. This is the connection that's going to connect to your data source. So if you have an ODBC connection or an Oracle connection, that's where you would define or map it in this connection field right here to say that, okay, yeah, my database that I'm running against is, for example, Microsoft Access 2007. That's where you would select that in here, and then you're able to connect all the tables into the system. So, for example, you have several different systems in here, or different types of databases you can connect to. You have Microsoft, Netezza, Oracle, SAP, Sybase. And so I mentioned earlier, if you've got Oracle TNS names installed on your PC, that's where you can connect to it on here. As you can see in here, there's different types of drivers that these will connect to. Same with Microsoft. You've got Access 2007, Microsoft SQL Server up to 2008. So in order for you to connect to it, what you would have to do is, if I chose, for example, in this case, 2005 ODBC driver and hit next here, that's where I can put in the username password to that specific ODBC driver and then choose that data source name that's being built. And from there, I'm able to connect to the system. In this case, we won't do that, just to kind of show you how that works. But that's what you would have to do in order to get that to work properly. Okay? Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is one of the tips and tricks regarding universe parameters. So if you have a user that's building a system or building a universe, one of the nice things you need to do is you can provide some sort of controls around that. One of the things you should do is, looks like we have a little bit of an issue here. Let me go and log back in. Sorry about that. What I was going to say is that if you've got users that are building reports, and sometimes if they don't have the knowledge around the data that's being mapped properly, what you can do is you can add restrictions in here in order for them to make sure that they don't build runaway queries in here to where it doesn't bog down the system or it doesn't bog down your database. And more importantly, your BO server as well. So we have seen that before where users have built reports and they built a runaway query that just never returned data, and what ended up happening is it crashed the system. So there are ways to prevent something like that from happening. So what you can do in here is if you go to File and back to Parameters, and then go under Controls right here, there's a query limit right here. This we find very important. You can always limit the execution time to return. In this case, right now we have a default of 90,000 rows. So what that means is when our user builds a report, and what it's going to do is it's going to return maybe the first 90,000 rows, or it's going to stop. Or you can limit the execution time on here to 5 minutes. So if it takes longer than 5 minutes, the report is going to stop running, and that's where it ends right there. So that's one of the more important ones that I found very useful when I'm building a universe, because of the fact that you will have users that Web Intelligence is a ad hoc tool, so you can, depending on how many users you want to build a report, there's always chances that they can build runaway queries or bad queries that can bog down the system. So this is kind of a check to make sure that it doesn't bog down your system. So I'm going to go and hit cancel here, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about table browser. So if I went in here and clicked on table browser, This allows me to add specific tables. I can just simply drag and drop these tables. I know we've got like a temp table in here. If I just drag that in here, I've got a temporary table in here. So that's how, after you create your universe connection and you're connected to the database, that's where you can come in and bring in your tables into here. So that's how you simply would do that. So you can go and delete that. And in here you can see some different joins. These lines in between here are called joins. And so if I double click on one of these joins, you'll note that the types of joins that we have an equal join here. And if you want to, you can select an outer join. That's where you just simply click on either one of these, and then that would apply an outer join. And it's kind of hard to see, but right here is where the outer join was placed on here. Okay? So an outer join, you can place outer joins in here in the system. You can also create shortcut joins by just simply, like right here, if I click on here, double click on it, and then I have cardinality on here, and then I've got shortcut joins that I've placed on here. Okay? So there are different types of joins that you can build. One of the things that we do come across is something called looping. And with loops, one of the issues that you run into is that if you create a report that has constant looping, what it's going to do is it's going to build another runaway query or a Cartesian product. So what I'm going to talk about in our next part 2 is talking about how to eliminate looping and context issues that you may run into. I'm sorry, eliminating looping and then using aliases in context to be able to fix that problem. All right, so just kind of keep that in mind for next week, that when we talk about looping, there are some ways, some tips around fixing those types of issues. Okay, so let's say that you've got your tables mapped up properly. You've got everything in here. You've got your tables. You've got your joins the way you want them. And then the next thing here on the left side is your object. And within here, what this folder demonstrates is called a class. So this is just a way to organize your objects that you're building. So the end user or your report consumer, they're going to see only this side of it when they build a web intelligence report. And based off of that, then they'll be able to drag and drop objects into the report and return data off of that. So in here, again, these are classes. And what these blue objects indicate, these blue objects are called dimensions. What dimensions are is an object that's focused on analysis in the query. This is a default qualification at the time the object is created. So what this basically is, it's just the focus of your query. And so in here, if I double click on year, you'll see that it's going to return the years 1999 and 2001. So if I double click on here, it opens up an object's properties box. And then here, this is the select statement that's coming from this table in here. Okay? So once you have your tables in here, that's where you want to go in and build your objects and build your select statements against that. One of the other things you can do is go into properties, and then you have your list of values right here. With the properties within here, you have associated list of values. So what this basically means is when a user builds a report, they can choose a list of values. If you want to create a prompt that says that return list of select your year that you're running the report against, you can provide a list of values in the report. They can choose from that list of which years they want to use. That's where the associated list of values comes into play. Now, if I want to go to edit in here, what this is going to do is it's going to bring up another box to where you can add additional filters or conditions into here. So where you can say, okay, well, if I want a condition to only where I return a year of 1999 only, then you can apply an object. You can apply a filter in here that only returns 1999 as the object in here. So there are some different ways you can filter on a specific object. So the reason why that's important is if you can always find ways to build better, more efficient queries with better runtimes, that's where I recommend you would do that. Is if you can go into here and build an object that would filter out some data if you have data that's erroneous or not needed. Another interesting tip here is if you go under the Advanced tab, this kind of goes back to one of the benefits I talked about briefly earlier, was the fact that there's data security that you can place on here. So what you've got in here is a data access level. If I click on this drop-down, I've got 5 separate access levels. Now, right now it's set to public, which means that when a user runs the report using the year object, it's going to return all the data that's being returned here. Now, if you want to set this, for example, to like a control or restricted object, what that means is if somebody has a security permission of restricted or higher, then they're able to return the data based off of that. So that would come more into play is if Social Security numbers, salary information, something like that, where only a set number of users are allowed to view that type of information. That's where you can control access on there. So that's where I find that very important for that specific object. One other way you can hide objects, if you still want to show the objects here, but for some reason you don't want them to show up in the report or a list of objects that the user selects, you can right-click on it, and then you can hit select hide items. And so what that does is it puts it in italics, and what that means is what that's going to do is when a user runs the report or tries to build an object or run a report, build a report off of that specific object, they won't be able to see it. And so again, that comes into play if you want to hide Social Security numbers, salary information, that type of information is where you could find that being very useful. All right, I'm going to show that item again. So again, these are called dimension objects. And if I click on measures, the measures class, this icon right here is a measures icon. And what a measure basically does is it returns numeric information for a specific object. So where this comes into play is if I double click on here, this is more of like a sum. If you wanted to sum up the number, the sales revenue for a specific year, that's where that comes into play. So some sort of calculation you want to perform on it, that's where that comes into play. And that's where you would place that in here under the sum, under this function right here, sum. You have some other options in here. You have min, max, count, and database delegated. So, for example, if you want to return the min number of the min salary revenue for a specific state, that's where you would change that into your min right here. You could change it to that, and it will return the minimum amount of that. Okay, so that's what simply a measure does. It's a calculated variable. Calculated object that's being used to add information, some information. You can perform counts, min, maxes, those types of things. The last type of object is called called a detail, and that's denoted by this green icon here. And if I double click on that, what that's going to do is it's going to bring up another. When I double click on it, I'll see an object property, and then the difference in here is this detail. It gives you more information about a specific object. So in here, it just tells me that the year, and it tells me if it's a physical period or not. That's where this comes into play. Details, to be honest with you, aren't used very much, but they do have some use if you're trying to build a report and you want to get more information regarding a specific dimension. So that's where a detail comes into play. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about RowLevel Security. And what RowLevel Security, again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier about data security, and one of the ways you can prevent users from viewing everything that they don't need to see. One of the things you can do is go into Tools, and then Manage Security, and then Manage Access Restrictions. And what you can do is that we've created a specific RowLevel Security here to say that, okay, Anderson, the user ID is Anderson in here, and if I wanted to view what type of restriction he's got on here, what I'll do is I'll go to SQL, I go to rows, and then under here it'll say that under Anderson, he can only view his sales revenue for that specific store that he owns. And so that's where that comes into play. And then this is where you can put in your where clause to say that, okay, based off of this database column right here, this user is only able to view his specific store information. So, row restrictions, that comes in very handy when you're trying to limit the amount of data that the user is supposed to be able to see here. So that's a little bit about row restrictions. And then, so what we can finally do is after you've built your report or you built your universe, you applied some sort of security if need be, you've created your objects, and then if you're ready to localize this universe, you can do that by just going to File, Export. It's going to ask me to save it. That's fine. I'm going to hit Continue, and then you can place that back into the Webby Universe folder. So if I click on this Browse button, these are the different folders that are created within our repository, and so these are just the ways that they're structured. And so if I place it back in that Webby Universe folder, what that's going to do is it's going to take me back. It's going to overwrite the previous version of the universe that I have created. So that's where you would do that. Just hit OK there, and then that's how you have it export to the repository. Okay, I'm not going to do that here just because I don't want to put in that those changes that we made. So what I could do is now your report consumer, they can log into the website and create a web intelligence report. From there, they would select the appropriate universe. When they select the appropriate universe, in this case it would be eFashion on here. That's just the universe we chose. From here, you'll notice that all they see is this type of information. And these are the classes that they're being used to run against. Okay? So all they would have to simply do as a report builder would just simply drag and drop the objects, or they can just double click on it. And then, let me bring in some sales information. And let's bring in the store. Okay? So if I run this report, what it's doing is it's, looks like I timed out here. What that's going to do is it's going to build in it's going to run the query based off those objects. So that, like I showed you briefly there, those objects there are going to be seen only by the report consumer. They are not going to obviously see this information whenever they build a report. Okay? And so with that in mind, I'm just going to briefly build you a quick report. And these, after the user logs in, this is where they'll go in, select the universe that they want to run against. And that's, I'm logged in as the administrator, so I have access to all the universes so far. But yeah, there's ways to restrict that to where they can only view their certain universes. And so when I open that up, and it's going to open up that report panel, and then from there we can build a simple report that will return data on that. And so the only way that your changes are going to be placed on there is only after you export the universe. That's very important. If you do not export the universe, then the changes that you've made in the universe will not be seen by the public or the users that are needing to run the report. So if I bring in, let's see, if I bring in store, let's say store name, sales revenue, and then quarter, let's bring over state. So if I run this query, it's running against my universe in here, and then it's going to retrieve data based on how I've mapped the data. So that's pretty much it. That's the data that's being returned based off my universe. And so one of the things, that pretty much concludes lesson one, part one, excuse me. Now in part two, it's going to be slightly different. I've logged into a 3.1 environment. But in part two, we're going to log into BusinessObjects 4.0 environment to where you can see some multiple things like multiple data sources being mapped to the universe, which means that you can have multiple tables as opposed to, what I mean by multiple tables is that you can have multiple data sources mapped to one location. So it's not just one universe connection creating one against one universe. You can have multiple data sources that are being part of one universe. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, and we'll talk a little bit more about advanced tips and tricks in next week's webinar. That's all I had, Trent, and I would like to pass it back to you.
All right. Neil, I've got a question here,
okay.
And it is, how would you, let's get the official question before I try to guess at it. It is, how would you set row-level security for multiple users, say 400 or so, to see information that is pertinent to them only?
Absolutely. One of the easiest things I would do is, as opposed to creating 400 different restrictions, what I would do is I would place those 400 users in a group, and then you can also place that group into one restriction. So it would be a lot easier than creating 400 restrictions. You just have one restriction placed on that group, and then you would just create that restriction and then map that restriction to that group. That's how you would take care of that.
Okay. And again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to use that right-hand side panel of the GoToWebinar right there, or you can use the chat as well if that's preferable. Next question, Neil. For 3.0 or 3.1 to 4.0, is there a drastic difference in the view of it?
I would say drastic, but yes, the look and feel is slightly different. In 4.0, you're using projects and business layer, and then I just mentioned I briefly mentioned the multiple data sources. Yeah, it is slightly different when you're comparing 3.1 to 4.0. Yes.
Okay. Our next question here is, do you create one connection per database?
Yes. In 3.1, you have to do that, and even the previous versions of Business Objects, but in 4.0, you can use multiple data sources to create to one universe. So in 4.0, SAP was able to tweak that ability just for one universe to one connection. Now they're allowing multiple connections to one universe.
Great. All right. And just remember, folks, we will be having part 2 next week at the same time. As all the information is on our website, wciconsulting.com. And then, yes, we will have a recording available. We will have another member of WCI's team, Bill Thomas or Felix Evans, be contacting you, and we can get you recordings or copies of this PowerPoint slide if you would like. Neil, our next question here, it says the ag tables do not look like they're connected to the other tables. Is that the case? And if so, why not?
The at tables?
The ag tables.
Yeah, it's an e-fashion universe, and that's one of our sample universes. So yes, you are right in that sense. It's just the universe that was built in with Business Objects. But yeah, whenever you create your database or you're connecting to your database, the table browser, what that's used to do is bring in your tables one at a time, and if that's being seen from the database, then it will be shown on your universe, and you can just bring those over into the system, or bring into that blank schema, and then you can start connecting to it with your join. But that was just a sample database, or a sample universe, so that's why it wasn't being seen there.
All right, and another question here is, how is a shortcut join different from an equal or an outer join?
That's a good question. What a shortcut join does is that as opposed to going through A through B to C to connect to to create your joins from A to B, in order to get to A to C, you'd have to go through B. In this case, a shortcut join, if mapped properly or constructed properly in your database, you can go directly A to C. So what that does is that obviously cuts down on your performance. That's going to improve your runtime performance. And again, I like to use that term efficient. It makes your queries more efficient if you create some sort of shortcut join.
Okay, thank you, Neil. We have hit 11 o'clock by my time. We are going to save this for anything for next week. Again, 10:30 Central Time Zone, Tuesday. And you can get all the details from wciconsulting.com. Thank you for joining today. We appreciate it. And any further questions that you would like to take offline, please feel free to contact myself or Neil. It's up there on the screen. And if you have any questions about WCI in general, that's where you can find us as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.